I'm a tool and die man. I have spent 40 years measuring things to the thousandth of an inch. And I notice when something is out of true, the way other men notice a sour note in a song. So when an old buddy of mine, another shop owner across town, mentioned over coffee that some appraiser had been nosing around, asking what my operation was worth, I went still inside. Because in 25 years of marriage, my wife had never once asked me a single question about that shop. And now somebody was out there measuring it for parts. I knew right then, before I had a shred of proof, that two things were true. My marriage was over, and somebody had been quietly taking the dimensions of my whole life, getting ready to cut it up. I want you to understand why that one little detail told me everything. In my trade, you do not get an appraisal of a man's business for no reason. Nobody measures a thing that carefully unless they intend to do something to it. An appraisal is what you order right before you buy, or sell, or sue, or divide. And there was only one of those that fit a man's own wife ordering it in secret. I sat there with my coffee going cold and did the math the way I do everything, cold and exact. And the math came out to a single answer. And the answer was that the woman I'd been married to for a quarter century had already, quietly, behind my back, started the work of taking my life apart for salvage. I hadn't even known I was in a fight. She was already most of the way through planning how to win it. I'm going to tell you up front that this story has a satisfying shape, and I want you to stay for how it got there. Because I didn't get there by being cruel or breaking a single rule. By the end, the slick man who taught my wife to come after everything I'd built walked away with nothing. And he walked away fast. And the reason is the oldest lesson in my trade. Where are you listening from tonight? Tell me. I genuinely like knowing who's out there. And stay to the end. Because the thing my father taught me about how you protect what matters, decades before I ever needed it, is the whole point. And I think some of you need to hear it tonight, while you've still got time to do the setup. My name is Carl. I'm 49 years old, and I'm a tool and die maker in Iowa. I own a small machine shop, the one my father built and left to me, where we make the jigs and fixtures and dies that other factories use to stamp out their parts. It's precise, demanding work, the kind where a mistake the width of a hair scraps a whole job. And I love it, the way you love a thing you're genuinely good at. I was married to Cindy for 25 years. We have two grown kids, a son named Aaron, who's 23, and works the machines right alongside me now, and a daughter named Beth, who's 19 and away at college. I'm going to tell you how a man who builds the tools that make other things found out his own wife had hired somebody to measure him for the scrap heap, and how the careful setup my father taught me protected everything that mattered. If you're new to this channel, this is a place for the men who carry the load and never get asked how heavy it is. The ones who keep their word, work the long hours, and find out one ordinary morning that the people closest to them have been quietly taking measurements. I'm not selling anything, and I'm not going to tell you to go burn anything down. I'm just an old machinist who got measured for parts and walked away whole, telling it plain in case it helps you. If that's why you're here, subscribe and stick with me, because there's a man out there tonight who needs this, and folks like you passing it along is how it finds him. Let me start with the trust, because you cannot understand the judo at the end without understanding the foundation. I was a provider, the way my father was before me. A shop is a jealous thing. It needs you early and it needs you late. And when a rush job comes in with a factory down and bleeding money every hour, their line is stopped. You stay until it's done. Because that's the difference between a shop that lasts and one that closes. So I worked. Long days, a lot of Saturdays. My hands in steel and oil from before sunup. I told myself that was love. That a man who built and kept a good business to provide for his family had done the whole job of a husband. Hold on to how much I was at that shop, because the same long hours that kept us comfortable were the empty rooms at home where, it turned out, a stranger walked right in. I want you to understand the kind of husband I was, because it's the part that makes this fair instead of one-sided. I was loyal, and I was steady, and I was, I'm sorry to say, a little bit absent for 25 years, in the way a man gets absent when he tells himself the work is the love. I never strayed, never raised my hand, never missed a bill or a school play I could help missing. But I'd be lying if I said I really saw Cindy those last years. I'd come home tired and clean up and eat and fall asleep in the chair. And I called that being a good husband. And it was about half of one. A woman can be married to a faithful, hard-working man and still feel like the least interesting thing in his life, somewhere behind the shop and the next job and the bills. And a woman who feels like that long enough will eventually find somebody who acts like she's the most interesting thing in the room, even when that somebody is a liar running numbers on her. I gave a smooth man named Vance an opening, and the opening was years of a wife who'd stopped feeling seen. Cindy and I started with about nothing, the way most real things start. I was a young journeyman just taking over my dad's shop, and she married me knowing she was marrying the shop too. The hours, the oil under the nails that never fully washes out. We built a good life. We raised Aaron and Beth, paid off the house, put money away, and the shop did well, better than well, because of one thing in particular that I need to explain, since it's the center of everything. Years back, working a hard problem on the floor, I invented something, a fixture, a clever little clamping and locating device that solved a headache every shop in our line of work had been fighting for decades. It was simple, the way the best things are, and it worked. And I did the thing my father always told me to do, which was protect what you make. I patented it, and a manufacturer licensed that patent, and for years now it has paid me a steady royalty, not a fortune, but real money, quiet money, that came in whether I was at the bench or not. To the world, and to my wife, that patent and that shop looked like a gold mine sitting right there in our marriage. And that, I would come to understand, is exactly what made me a target. I want you to understand that I didn't invent that thing chasing money. I invented it because a problem was bothering me. The way a problem bothers a man who loves his trade. And I stayed late 100 nights working it out, sketching on the backs of job tickets, machining prototype after prototype until one of them finally held the work the way it ought to. It was honest work, the best of my life, done with my own 2 hands and my own stubborn head. And here's a thing I think about now. Those 100 late nights I spent inventing it, those were nights I wasn't home with Cindy. So the very thing that made me a target, the thing Vance smelled a fortune in, was built partly out of the same absence that drove my wife into his arms. A man's greatest work and his deepest failure can grow from the very same root. And that's a hard thing to sit with, but it's true. And I'd rather tell you the true hard things than the easy ones. Now I have to tell you about my father, because his hand is all over how this ended, even though he's been gone a long time. My dad built that shop from a single lathe in a rented bay, and he was a careful man. Careful the way you get when you've been poor and clawed your way up and never want to go back. He set that business up like he set up a job on the mill, slow and exact and square. And he drilled into me, over and over, that you keep the business clean and separate and its own thing. He left me the shop the right way, as my own separate inheritance, and he taught me to run it that way. Clean books, its own accounts. I paid myself a fair wage out of it, a market wage, and that wage went into our family. But the business itself, and the patent, and the royalty, I kept the way he taught me, separate, square, never mixed into the marriage. I did that for 25 years without ever once thinking I'd need it. I just did it because my father told me to. The way you build a jig right. Because that's how you were taught. Long before you know what part it'll hold, that setup, done decades early in the quiet, is the whole reason I'm standing here. I can still hear him saying it, leaning on the workbench with a cup of coffee, telling me a man's business is like a fixture. You build it once, you build it square and true and its own self-contained thing. And then it holds steady, no matter what gets clamped into it. He'd seen men lose everything. Good men, shops that took a lifetime to build, lost in a bad divorce or a lawsuit or a partner gone crooked, because they'd run everything together into one sloppy pile where you couldn't tell whose was whose. Never commingle, he'd say, like it was the 11th commandment. Keep the shop, and the home, the home. I thought he was just being an old worrier. I was a young man in love, and it never crossed my mind that the careful walls he made me build around that business would one day be the only thing standing between me and ruin. He built me a fortress and told me it was just good bookkeeping, and I kept the walls up out of habit and respect for a quarter century. And then one day I needed them, and they were there, exactly as square as the day he set them. I'll tell you about a warning I waved off, because it's the same one every blindsided man waves off. In the last couple of years, Cindy had changed. She'd gotten into a new social crowd, a wine club, some couples that ran with a flashier set than we ever had, people with boats and second homes and a lot of talk about money. And she'd started to seem restless and a little ashamed of our plain life, of the shop, of a husband who came home smelling like cutting oil. There was a man in that crowd, a smooth fellow named Vance, some kind of financial consultant, the sort who's always got a deal and a white smile and a way of making a working man feel small. Vance, Vance, Vance. And I thought, well, those are her new friends. Good for her. A machinist of all people should know that when a part starts coming out wrong, you stop and check the setup before you run another one, because something has shifted. Something had shifted in my marriage for 2 years. I kept running parts and not checking the setup. So that morning, when my buddy mentioned the appraiser, I didn't explode and I didn't say much. I just went quiet and careful, the way I get when a job's gone wrong and I need to find out why before I touch another thing. And over the next couple of weeks, paying attention the way I should have been paying attention all along, I pieced it together. And every piece had been right there in front of me. Cindy and Vance. It had been going on the better part of a year. The wine club and the late nights and the new clothes and the way she lit up at her phone and went cold at me. All of it. But here's the part that turned my stomach worse than the affair, and it's the part that tells you what kind of man Vance was. They hadn't just been carrying on. They'd been planning. Vance, the financial consultant, had looked at my shop and my patent and my royalty and seen a payday. And he'd been coaching my wife for months on how to come after all of it. They'd quietly hired an appraiser to value the business. She'd had a consultation with an aggressive divorce lawyer about what she could claim. The two of them had been sitting at that wine club doing arithmetic on my life's work, planning how to carve the biggest possible piece off the shop my father built, while she still slept in my bed and ate at my table and let me believe we were fine. The affair was a betrayal. The scheme was something colder. They weren't running away from my life. They were trying to back a truck up to it and load it out. And once I let myself look, every sign had been sitting right there on the bench in plain sight. The questions she'd started asking that last year, casual ones, about how the royalty worked, about whether the shop was doing well, about what the patent was really worth. Questions she'd never asked in 24 years and that I'd been so flattered by, I'd answered in detail. Like a fool handing a thief the combination. The way she'd encouraged me to talk up the business at dinners with the new crowd, with Vance leaning in attentive, asking smart follow-ups I'd taken for friendly interest. The mail from a bank I didn't recognize. The afternoon she'd had somebody at the house when I came home early, and the man's car pulling out, and her saying it was just an insurance fellow. I'd had every measurement I needed for a year. I just hadn't read the print, because reading it meant admitting that the woman I'd built a life with had started seeing me as a number on an appraisal. I want to tell you what I felt, standing in my shop with that figured out. And it was not what you'd think. It was the cold, steady calm I get when a job I thought was ruined turns out to have one clean path through it, if I'm patient and precise. Because here is the thing, Vance, the financial genius, and his appraiser did not know. The thing my wife had never bothered to learn in 25 years of never asking about the shop until she wanted to take it. That business was not what they thought it was, legally, and neither was that patent. My father had set it up separate. I'd kept it separate, religiously, for a quarter century. They were measuring a thing to cut it up, and they had the dimensions all wrong, because they'd never looked at the one drawing that mattered. The one my dad had made decades before any of them showed up. And so I did the hardest and smartest thing in this whole story, which was nothing. For a while, I did not confront her. I did not let on that I knew, because you do not warn the other shop that you found their mistake before the job's complete. I went home and I was steady and ordinary, the tired husband who suspected nothing, while inside I'd already started planning the cleanest job of my life. And the first thing I did was go see a lawyer of my own, a good one, before they ever knew I was awake. The lawyer I found was a sharp, plain-spoken woman named Ruth, who'd done family law in our county for 30 years. And when I laid it all out for her, the shop, the patent, the inheritance, the way my father had set it up, the way I'd kept it, she did something I'll never forget. She smiled. She told me how Iowa works. Iowa, she said, is a no-fault, equitable distribution state. So the affair itself won't win you a thing. The court won't punish them for it. Don't expect it to. But equitable distribution, she said, divides the marital property. And the key word is marital. Property you brought in or inherited and kept separate. Truly separate. Never commingled. That can stay yours. And then she had me walk her through the shop. The inheritance, clean and documented. The patent, in the business's name. The business kept its own thing. The clean books. The market wage I'd paid myself. So the marriage had already gotten its fair share of the value, year by year, in my salary, leaving little marital claim on the business itself. She set her pen down, and she said, "Carl, your father, who never met me, just won this case for you 25 years ago. They are about to find out that the gold mine they've been planning to split is mostly your separate property. And there is nothing that fancy consultant can do about it, because the setup was done long before he ever came sniffing around." Ruth gave me the rest of the rules too, the ones every good lawyer gives a wronged man. And they were rules I already understood in my bones, because they're the rules of my trade. Don't confront her. You'll only tip them off and let them start hiding or repositioning. Don't move out of the house. Don't touch the joint money or do anything cute, because a judge can smell a man trying to game it, and it rebounds on him. Document what's yours, cleanly, and move when you're ready, all at once, complete. It was the same discipline as the shop. You don't start cutting until the setup's checked and the program's proven. You measure, you plan, you prove it out, and then you run the part one time, clean, with no surprises. I'll tell you about the moment it almost went wrong, because it nearly cost me everything that mattered. When I understood that they'd been scheming for my money, a hot, ugly part of me wanted to fight dirty right back. I started thinking about how I could move money around, hide some of the royalty, make the shop look like less than it was, get cute with the numbers to make sure Cindy got as close to nothing as I could engineer. And I sat down at my own books one night to start doing exactly that. And then I stopped, because I heard my father's voice. "Keep it clean, Carl. Keep it square." And I understood that if I started cooking my own books to punish her, I'd be handing Vance and that aggressive lawyer the one weapon that could actually beat me, which was me breaking the law. The whole power of my position was that I was clean. My setup was square. The second I got cute, I'd scrap the very protection my father had built. So I closed the books, and I did not hide $1. And I did not move one thing. Because the cleanest job is the strongest job, and a man who keeps his hands clean cannot be cut by his own knife. I let the truth and the setup do the work, and I didn't dirty either one. When I was ready, I had Ruth move, clean and complete. And when Cindy and Vance and their aggressive lawyer got their first real look at the actual structure of what they'd been planning to split, the whole scheme came apart in their hands. The shop was separate. The patent was the business's, and the business was separate. The royalty flowed from separate property. The marriage's fair share had already been paid out, lawfully, year after year, in my wages, which we'd lived on and spent together. There was no gold mine to carve up. There was a fair, equitable division of the actual marital assets, the house, the savings, the ordinary things, which I split right down the middle without a fight, because that part was hers as much as mine, and I'm not a thief. But the shop my father built, and the patent I invented, and the royalty that came from them, the very things Vance had smelled a fortune in, stayed exactly where they'd been for a quarter century, with me. I almost felt sorry for their lawyer, who I'm told had been working partly on the promise of a big payout from a big award, and who now had to sit my wife down and explain that the whole foundation of the case she'd been sold. The idea that half of that shiny machine shop was hers for the taking had been wrong from the start. That the diligent appraiser had appraised something the law was never going to let her touch. Their big score evaporated, not because I hid it, but because it had never legally been there for them to take. They'd built their entire plan on a measurement they took without ever checking the print. And the part came out scrap. And it was nobody's fault but their own. There's a thing that happens in my trade when a man runs a job without proving out his setup first. He'll machine a whole batch, fast and confident, and they'll all look fine. And then he checks the first one against the print and finds he was off from the start. And the whole batch is junk. Every shiny piece of it. Hours of work straight into the scrap bin. That's what Cindy and Vance did. They ran the whole batch on a bad setup. They were so sure, so confident, measuring and planning and counting their money, and they never once stopped to check their work against the one print that governed everything, the legal structure of what was actually mine. Confidence is no substitute for checking your setup. They learned that the hard way, with their whole scheme in the scrap bin, and no time, and no marriage left to run it again. And here is the part about the slick man, the cascade, the thing my wife did not see coming because she'd been too dazzled to see anything. Vance, the financial consultant, the man with the white smile and the deal, lost interest with remarkable speed once the payday disappeared. It turned out, when you stripped away the wine club and the talk, that what Vance had been courting was not so much my wife as my wife's apparent claim to a machinist's fortune. And the day that claim came back close to zero, his ardor cooled like a casting pulled from the mold. He drifted. He had other prospects, other lonely women with husbands who maybe hadn't built their jigs as square. And my wife, who had burned down a 25-year marriage and a family on the word of a man who'd been running arithmetic on her the whole time, was left standing in the cold, holding neither the fortune she'd been promised nor the man who'd promised it. She'd been measured for parts, too. She just never knew it until the man doing the measuring set down his calipers and walked away, off to measure somebody else. I took no joy in that, and I want you to believe me, because there were kids in this, grown kids, but kids, and their mother's humiliation was their pain, too. But I'd be lying if I told you there wasn't a hard, quiet justice in watching a greedy scheme defeat itself. I never had to lift a finger to punish either of them. Their own greed did it. They'd reached for too much, measured wrong, and grabbed at a thing that wasn't there, and they fell on their own faces doing it. All I'd done was keep my setup clean and let them run their own bad part. Cindy came to me once, near the end. After the scheme had collapsed and Vance had drifted off, and she was not angry anymore, just smaller. And she asked me how long I'd known, and whether I'd planned the whole thing to humiliate her. And I told her the truth, calm as I've ever been. I told her I hadn't planned anything, that I'd simply kept my father's shop the way my father taught me, for 25 years, long before she ever decided to come after it. And that if that felt like a trap, it was only because she'd walked into a room she'd never once bothered to look in until she wanted to take what was in it. I told her I was sorry for my part, for the empty evenings, for the years I'd let her feel like the least important thing in my life. And I meant it. But the scheme, I said, the appraiser, the lawyer, the careful planning behind my back while she smiled at me across the supper table, that was hers and that man's. And the only reason it failed was that it had been built, from the very first measurement, on a lie about what was mine. She didn't have anything to say to that. There wasn't anything to say. I came out of it standing and square and clean. I kept the shop my father built and the patent I'd invented and the work I love. My kids stayed close, both of them. And my son still stands at the next machine over from me every single day, which is a kind of wealth Vance will never understand. I split the real marital property fair and even. No games. Because that was the right and lawful thing, and because a man's name is worth more than a few extra dollars taken ugly. I never ran Cindy down to our kids. Not once. Because they need their mother, and because a man who poisons his children to win a fight has scrapped the only part that ever mattered. I just kept my hands clean and let the truth come out to spec. I won't pretend I came through without scars, and I'll own my peace, because a man always has one. I was at that shop too much, married to the work the way my father had been, and I left my wife alone in too many empty evenings while I chased the next job. She'd grown restless and ashamed of our plain life, and I'd felt it and said nothing, and just gone back to the bench, because the bench was easier than the harder work of being a present husband. Her choice to do what she did and to scheme the way she did, that was a coldness all her own that I'll never excuse. But I'd left the shop door of my marriage standing open for years, and a man who won't own his part learns nothing and scraps the same part twice. I'll tell you the thing that held me together through the worst of it. And it was my son. There was an evening, a few weeks after the papers were filed, when the shop was empty and quiet, and I was standing at my father's old surface grinder, just running my hand along it, thinking about him and how his careful setup had reached forward across all those years to catch me when I fell. And Aaron, my boy, 23 years old, came back into the shop looking for me, and he saw my face. And he didn't say anything dumb or try to fix it. He just picked up a part off the bench and started checking it with the micrometer, working next to me in the quiet, the way men in my family have always said the things we can't say, with our hands, side by side over good work. And I looked at my son standing at the next machine over, learning the trade his grandfather started, keeping the same setup square that I'd keep and that he'd hand to his own kids someday. And I understood what the real inheritance was. It was never the patent or the royalty or the building. It was this, a son at the next machine, a way of doing things, clean and square, handed down. Vance and his calipers could never have measured the one thing in that shop that was actually worth a fortune, because it doesn't show up on any appraisal. So here's what a tired tool and die man would tell you tonight, for whatever it's worth. The setup is everything. That's the first and last truth of my whole trade. Any fool can make one good part on a good day with the boss watching. The real work, the work that separates a craftsman from a button pusher, is building the jig, the fixture, the setup that holds the work true, so that every part after comes out right whether you're watching or not. You spend your time and your care up front, in the quiet, when there's no pressure and no crisis, and you get that setup dead square, and then it protects you forever. You cannot build the jig in the middle of the emergency. By then it's too late. The parts already scrapped. My father built my jig 25 years before I needed it, and he built it square. And when the pressure came and somebody tried to cut my life up for parts, his setup held me true. And I didn't have to do anything cute or ugly or desperate, because the careful work had already been done, long ago, in the quiet, by a careful man who loved me. Build your jig now, in your own quiet, before you ever think you'll need it. Keep your affairs clean and square and your own, because the day somebody comes to measure you for parts, the only thing that will save you is a setup you did, right back when nobody was watching. And I don't just mean your money, though I mean that too. Keep your character square the same way. The reason I could win clean is that I had nothing to hide and nothing to be ashamed of. No dirty books, no cruel tricks, no skeletons for a sharp lawyer to dig up. A clean man is a hard man to beat, because there's nothing to grab onto. The temptation, when somebody wrongs you, is to get down in the mud with them and out-dirty them. And I'm telling you, as a man who stood at his own books with the pen in his hand, that's the move that scraps you. Stay square, stay clean. Let your setup and the plain truth do the cutting. It is slower and it is harder, and it does not feel as good as revenge for about a week, and then it feels a great deal better for the rest of your life. I've still got the shop, my father's shop, my name and my son's coming up behind mine, and the machines run, and the royalty comes in, and the work is good and honest and mine. The house is quieter and a great deal more square than it was. I think about my father a lot now, more than I did when he was alive, which is the way of it. He never knew Vance, never knew Cindy would do what she did, never imagined the exact shape of the trouble that was coming for me decades after he was gone. He just loved me, and being a careful man, he showed that love the only way he knew, by teaching me to build things square and keep them clean, and never commingle what was mine into a sloppy pile somebody could one day claim. He thought he was teaching me bookkeeping. He was building me a fortress, and when the day came that I needed those walls, they were there. Every one of them dead square, because a good man had set them up long ago, in the quiet, with no idea of the storm, just out of love and the habit of doing things right. That's the kind of inheritance that matters. Not the money, the setup. The square walls a careful man builds for the people he loves, that hold long after he's gone. Tell me where you're standing when you hear this, and tell me, if somebody came tomorrow to measure your life for parts, would your setup hold? I hope it would. And if you've been putting off the careful, quiet, square work of getting your house in order, I hope you'll hear an old machinist and go build your jig today, while it's still calm. Because the setup is everything, and you cannot make it in the middle of the crash.